I need $280,000. That's how my son began the conversation that night. No greeting, no warmth, just numbers. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. Maybe he was joking. Maybe he said 28, not 280. But when I saw the tightness in his jaw and the way Sophia's hand rested possessively on his arm, I knew he meant every word. For your family, I asked, keeping my voice steady even as my heart stumbled. Yes, he said quickly. It's urgent. We're in a tough spot. Business went bad, and the house, we might lose it if we don't act fast. I looked at him carefully. His suit was pressed, his watch gleamed, and Sophia's perfume filled the room. Nothing about them looked like people on the edge of ruin. Yet here he was, my son, demanding my life's savings as if it were his birthright. You've always said family helps family, Sophia added sweetly. Her tone dipped in sugar, but her eyes sharp. And Daniel has done so much for you over the years. Don't you think it's time you helped him back? That sentence stung more than I could show. What had my son ever done for me except drift further away with every passing year? But I didn't argue. I just stared at him, at the man who used to be my little boy, the same boy who once pressed dandelions into my palm and said, "Someday I'll make you rich, Mom." Now he sat across from me, asking for everything I had left. 280,000, I repeated quietly. That's everything, Daniel, all of it. He nodded, eyes hard. I know, and I need it tonight. The way he said it, need it, not please, not if you can, turned something inside me cold. I folded my hands on the table, trying to find the right words, but he leaned forward before I could speak. Mom, don't overthink it. We'll pay you back. It's for our family. You want your grandchildren to have a roof over their heads, don't you? Sophia sighed dramatically beside him. Honestly, Daniel, I told you she wouldn't understand. That broke me a little. I wasn't the enemy, but somehow they made me feel like one. Daniel, I said softly, I've worked my whole life to save that money. It's not about the amount, it's about what it means. It's security, peace. You can't just... Mom, he snapped, slamming his hand on the table. The dishes rattled. My heart did too. You think I'm lying. You think I'd come here begging if it wasn't real. Silence filled the room. Even Sophia looked startled by his tone. I took a slow breath and looked at the son I had loved more than life itself, and realized I no longer recognized him. When he left that night, he didn't hug me. He didn't even say goodbye. Just slammed the door and drove off into the dark, his headlights cutting through the rain. And as I stood there, staring at the wet footprints he'd left on my floor, I knew one thing for certain. When he came back again, I wouldn't be here. The sound of the door closing echoed through the house long after Daniel had gone. I stood there for a while, just listening to the silence he left behind. Funny thing about silence, when you've loved someone too much, it doesn't feel empty. It feels heavy, like every unspoken word is pressing on your chest, waiting to crush you. I looked at the table, half-finished dinner, a cup of tea gone cold, and the seat where my son had sat only moments ago. He had come into my home, demanded my life savings, and walked away as if I were a stranger. I picked up his cup and stared at it. There was a faint lipstick stain on the rim. Sophia's. Even her mark had stayed longer than his warmth. That night, I couldn't sleep. The rain started again, tapping on the window, soft but relentless. I used to love that sound. Now it just felt like the world was whispering, "You're alone again." I sat on the edge of my bed, holding the little box where I kept my documents. The savings account book, property papers, old photographs, a lifetime's worth of effort packed in a small tin box. I opened it slowly, running my fingers over each page. Every number written, there had a story. Nights I skipped dinner. Winters I wore the same coat. Birthdays I celebrated alone, so Daniel could have more. And tonight, all of that had been reduced to a demand. I tried to tell myself he was desperate. Maybe he was under pressure. Maybe Sophia pushed him. But no matter how much I wanted to believe that, I couldn't forget the way he looked at me, not as his mother, but as his solution. I got up and went to the mirror. For a moment, I didn't even recognize the woman staring back. Wrinkles lined her face, but it wasn't age, it was exhaustion. Years of love without return had left their mark. I whispered to my reflection, "He doesn't love you anymore." And then, almost immediately, I answered myself, "No, he's forgotten what love looks like." The next morning, Daniel called again. His voice was colder now. "Mom, I'm coming by tonight," he said. "We need to settle this." Settle this. As if our relationship was a transaction. When the call ended, I sat for a long time, staring at the photo on my bedside table. Daniel, at 8 years old, missing a tooth, smiling proudly as he held a paper star he made for me. The boy in that photo would have never spoken to me like that. But the man he became, he already had. By evening, I had made my decision. I pulled out a pen and a small notebook and started writing. Not a letter of anger, but of clarity. I wrote down everything I wanted to tell him, every truth I had swallowed over the years, every sacrifice he had forgotten. When I finished, I closed the notebook and took a deep breath. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt calm, because I knew what I had to do. He would come back tonight, and when he did, I wouldn't be here. The morning arrived quietly, like it didn't know what had happened the night before. Sunlight touched the curtains, soft and innocent, unaware that by the end of this day, everything would change. I made myself a cup of tea, same as every morning, but this time, it didn't taste the same. Even sugar couldn't hide the bitterness that lingered in my heart. I sat by the window, watching the street come alive. Children rushed to school, neighbors chatted, cars rolled by. Everyone seemed to have somewhere to go, something to hold on to. Everyone except me. But today, I did have something to do. something final. I opened the little tin box again. Inside lay the documents that carried my entire life: the savings book, the property papers, the small gold bracelet my husband had given me on our first anniversary. I touched it gently, and for a second I felt him beside me again, calm, reassuring, the way he used to be when life felt too heavy. I kept my promise, I whispered. I raised him well. I just didn't know I'd lose him in the process. I got dressed, wrapped my shawl tightly, and walked to the bank. The lady at the counter smiled politely, not knowing she was helping a mother disappear from her own life. I'd like to close my accounts, I said quietly. She looked surprised. All of them, ma'am. Yes, I replied, all of them. By noon, I was standing outside with a small envelope in my bag. Everything I had ever saved, everything Daniel wanted. But it wasn't his anymore. Instead of heading home, I took a bus to the other side of town, to the little orphanage I used to visit years ago. The children there still remembered me as Grandma Grace. They ran up to me the moment I walked in, wrapping their tiny arms around my waist. That warmth, it was something I hadn't felt in years. I met the caretaker, Mrs. Louise, and placed the envelope on her desk. I want this to go to the children, I said, all of it. Their school, their clothes, their food, everything. She looked at me, startled. Grace, are you sure this is? Yes, I interrupted softly. It's for my family. And I meant it. That afternoon, I went back home one last time. The house felt different now, lighter, as if it already knew I was leaving. I walked from room to room, touching the walls, the furniture, the memories. In the living room, I paused before the old photograph, me and Daniel, years ago, his arms wrapped around me, both of us smiling like the world was ours. I took the photo frame down and placed it on the table beside a folded letter. The same letter I had written the night before. I sealed it with trembling hands and wrote his name on it. Just Daniel, no my son, no love, Mom. Some things I had already buried. Before leaving, I stood at the doorway one last time and whispered into the empty air. You asked for $280,000 for your family. I gave it to one, just not yours. Then, without looking back, I stepped outside, locked the door, and placed the key under the flower pot, where he used to hide his toy cars as a child. By the time the sun began to set, I was on a train heading far away, the letter waiting for him on the table, the house waiting for its silence. And that night, when Daniel returned, he would find only two things left of me: a photograph and my absence. When Daniel pulled into the driveway that night, the house looked exactly the same, quiet, still, the porch light glowing faintly in the rain. But something felt off. He couldn't explain it, only that his chest felt heavy, his steps slower than usual. He walked up to the door and turned the knob. It wasn't locked. Inside, the air was cold, too still. Mom, he called out. No answer. He stepped inside, his shoes echoing on the wooden floor. The table was clean, except for a single folded letter resting beside a photograph. The same photograph that once hung on the wall, him and his mother, smiling, frozen in a happier time. He picked up the letter, hands trembling without knowing why. The paper smelled faintly of her perfume, lavender, and old memories. He unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was neat, shaky, but deliberate. You asked for $280,000 for your family. I gave it to one. Not yours, but to the children who still know what love means. I don't hate you, Daniel. Hate is just another kind of attachment, and I have none left. I gave you everything once, my time, my youth, my heart. And when you asked for what little remained, I realized you no longer saw me as a mother, only as an option. So I did what mothers do best. I gave. Only this time, I gave to those who will never forget the meaning of it. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. Don't look for me. I need peace more than you need my money. Family isn't who demands, Daniel. It's who remembers. The paper slipped from his hands. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at the floor, the letter lying open beside his shoes. The room was too quiet, too cruel. Gone, he whispered, almost to himself. He rushed through the house, her room, the kitchen, the backyard, calling her name, shouting now, desperate. Mom, Mom. But the walls stayed silent. The only sound was the rain, whispering against the windows. He fell to his knees in the hallway, the same hallway where he had once taken his first steps, where she had once cheered and clapped for him. And now there was no one left to answer. Sophia entered quietly, her face unreadable. She really left? She asked, glancing around the empty house. Daniel didn't answer. His hands were shaking as he reached for the photograph again. She's not coming back, he said, voice breaking. Not this time. He spent the night sitting on the floor, the letter beside him, reading it over and over until the words blurred through his tears. By morning, the guilt had sunk in too deep to be undone. The next few weeks were chaos. The business failed, Sophia left, and the world he had built on pride and money collapsed around him. For the first time in years, Daniel felt what his mother had felt all along, loneliness that didn't make a sound. He tried to find her, checked shelters, hospitals, even called the police. But it was as if she had vanished into thin air. And yet, every night, when he closed his eyes, he could still hear her voice, soft, trembling, forgiving. Sometimes leaving is the only way to teach love what it has lost. Months passed, seasons changed, but for Daniel, time had stopped the night his mother left. Every morning began the same. A bitter cup of coffee, unopened mail, and the haunting silence of an empty house that once smelled of warmth and love. He had sold the business. The house stood half empty, and Sophia was gone. But one thing never left, that letter. He kept it on his nightstand, folded neatly, like a wound he refused to heal. One evening, a letter arrived. No return address. Just his name written in that same shaky handwriting he knew too well. His heart raced as he opened it. Daniel, if this reaches you, it means I'm somewhere quiet now. Somewhere the noise of the world can't find me. Don't cry for me, my boy. I was never angry at you. I was only tired of giving love where it was taken as debt. I've found a small home by the sea. I help children here, ones who have no mothers, no voices. I tell them stories. I cook them meals. And for the first time in years, I feel needed again. You once asked for $280,000 for your family. I hope now you understand. You were always my family. I just wished you'd remembered it before it was too late. If you ever come looking for me, follow the sound of waves. But don't come to apologize. Come to understand. The letter ended without a signature, just a pressed flower at the bottom, one she used to keep in her books. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat outside, staring at the horizon, the moonlight spilling over his face like forgiveness he didn't deserve. He whispered to the wind, "I'm sorry, Mom. I was too blind to see what love really looked like." Epilogue, The Sea of Silence. Years later, an old man walked along a quiet coastal town, holding a single folded letter in his trembling hands. His hair was gray, his steps slower, but his eyes carried the same searching sadness. He reached a small cottage overlooking the ocean. Flowers by the window, wind chimes whispering softly. He knocked once, twice. No answer. Through the window, he saw a framed photograph on the table, a young boy and a smiling woman. Beside it, a vase with fresh lilies and a small plaque that read, "In loving memory of Margaret Hayes, she gave love, even when it wasn't returned." Daniel stood there, tears tracing his wrinkles. The sound of waves filled the silence, steady, eternal. He sank to his knees, whispering, "I found you, Mom, but too late." He placed his letter beside her photo. The wind caught its edges, flipping it open. "You were right, Mom. Money builds walls, love breaks them. I hope you know now. I finally learned what family means." As the sun dipped below the horizon, the ocean shimmered golden. And for a fleeting second, Daniel swore he felt her presence, soft, forgiving, like a warm hand resting on his shoulder. The sea whispered one last time, as if carrying her final words through the wind. "I never left, Daniel. I just waited for you to see me." And with that, the story ended, not in hatred or blame, but in a silence that finally felt like peace. The sound of waves became my only companion. Every morning, I'd wake to the scent of the sea and the laughter of children outside my little cottage. It wasn't much, 2 rooms, peeling paint, and an old wooden chair by the window. But it was enough. After all, peace doesn't ask for luxury, only space to breathe. There was a small orphanage nearby. The children there were loud, messy, and full of life. everything my home hadn't been for years. At first, I would only bring them food, a few loaves of bread, soup when I had enough to share. But slowly, they began bringing me something far more precious: joy. They started calling me Nana, and for the first time in so long, I didn't feel forgotten. Sometimes at night, when the sea was calm and the stars were bright, I'd sit outside with my knitting and whisper to the wind, "I hope you're well, Daniel." I never curse at him. Anger is too heavy for old hearts. But I prayed that wherever he was, he had finally learned what love truly means. One winter, a boy from the orphanage, little Tom, fell sick. He reminded me so much of Daniel when he was small. Same brown eyes, same stubborn smile. I stayed by his bedside every night, holding his hand, humming the lullabies I used to sing decades ago. When he recovered, he looked at me and said, "Nana, you have a sad smile." I asked him why. He said, "Because it looks like you're waiting for someone who forgot to come home." That night, I cried for the first time in years. Not because I was lonely, but because a child had seen through what I tried to hide from the world. The wound that never truly healed. I often wondered if Daniel ever found peace, if he still lived in that big empty house, surrounded by the echoes of what he'd lost. Sometimes I dreamt of him walking down the shore, older, gentler, calling my name. And in those dreams, I always smiled and said, "You finally found me, my boy." But dreams, like tides, always fade. One evening, the sea turned golden with the setting sun. I sat on my porch, wrapped in my old shawl, listening to the children playing in the distance. A strange calm filled my chest, the kind that comes before a goodbye. I took out my journal and wrote a few words. "If Daniel ever comes, tell him I loved him till my last breath." I closed the book and smiled softly, because even if he never came, I knew love had found its way not to him, but through him, through the little hands I held, the hungry mouths I fed, the hearts I mended. That was enough, more than enough. Years later, when the sea took me quietly in my sleep, the children found me sitting in that same chair by the window, the shawl still around my shoulders, the faintest smile on my lips. And beside me lay that old photograph, a mother and her son, frozen in time, still smiling. It took Daniel years to gather the courage to follow her trail. He had searched in cities first, hospitals, shelters, even old neighborhoods where her name had once meant warmth. But he never found her, not until one rainy morning, when an old woman at a small bookstore handed him a faded envelope. "She left this years ago," she said softly. Said one day her son might come looking. The envelope had just 3 words written on it: "By the sea." And that's how he found himself standing before a weathered cottage by the ocean, wind brushing against his face like a ghost's gentle touch. The paint had faded, the windows were fogged, and flowers grew wild along the porch. He pushed the door open. It creaked softly, almost like it remembered him. Inside, everything was simple, untouched. There was a chair by the window, a half-finished knitting basket beside it, and an old photograph resting on the table, him and her, smiling. And beside it, her journal. He sat down slowly, hands trembling as he opened it. The pages were filled with small stories, moments from her new life, stories of the children she loved, letters she never sent. He turned each page like it was a piece of her heartbeat. Then he reached the last one. Daniel, if you're reading this, it means you finally came. I don't need your apology. I never did. I only wanted you to know that even after everything, you were my greatest love and my hardest lesson. When you left, I learned that sometimes love doesn't mean holding on. Sometimes it means letting go, so that both hearts can learn to breathe again. I hope you found peace, my boy, because I did. The words blurred as his tears fell onto the paper. He pressed his hand against the journal, whispering through broken breaths, I did find peace, Mom, just not the way I wanted to. He stayed there until the sun began to set, watching the same ocean that had watched over her for years. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel angry or lost. He just felt small, human. As the sky turned gold, he took the photograph and her journal, placed them back on the table, and whispered, Goodbye, Mom. Thank you for teaching me what love really was. Before leaving, he stepped outside and looked at the sea. The waves moved gently, whispering against the shore, soft, endless, forgiving. And in that moment, he felt it, the warmth of her love in the wind, the rhythm of her heart in the waves. He smiled faintly and said, You were never really gone, were you? The sea didn't answer. It didn't have to, because love, once given, never truly leaves. It just changes form from voice to memory to silence. And that silence was finally peaceful